Welcome to another episode of The Rabbi and the Therapist. And once again, I am happy to welcome into our studios Dr. Yael Respler. Dr. Respler is known really throughout the world. Her articles in the Jewish press, other articles that have shown up in other magazines, different weekends and different types of holiday things. She is always featured.
I just am going away for Pesach. I just wanted to mention, I'm going away to with the Pesach experience in Stamford, Connecticut, in the Armonne. I'll just mention it. If anyone wants to go, they do a great job.
Right.
Okay.
And I must say, I'm a great fan. I've worked with Dr. Respler over many, many years. And I'm very, very happy that she's here to continue our conversation, talking about relationships.
Right, talking about relationships. And not that long ago, if I'm not mistaken, we were reading in the Torah about relationship between two brothers, right? Jacob and Esau. And then shortly thereafter, we were reading about this terrible story where favored son, right, is is banished, left to die, frankly, by his brothers.
You say that a little too heavy.
I know, really, the story bothers me.
It worked out.
The story bothers me. What can I tell? I actually, when I mentioned it, I was thinking about all the snakes in the pit. So anyway, let's move on. But at the same time, let's continue the conversation. It's not infrequent where you find families where there are these bitter feuds.
Unfortunately, you're right.
Unfortunately, yeah. Between siblings. We'll leave parent-child alone for now and discuss siblings, because in my experience, both personal and professional, it's these sibling conflicts which tend to sort of pit the parents in the middle, actually,
right.
where they have to choose. So maybe we should talk a little about the sort of the seeds or the sources of those types of really unfortunate conflicts, and perhaps come up with some pieces of wisdom as far as how people can deal with them.
I think one of the issues is that when parents favor children, and that's exactly what happened with Yosef, the Tonat Hapasim. When parents favor children, and that's why the parents, as you say, get in the middle, and unfortunately parents do that.
Is it normal to favor one child over another?
Yes, unfortunately, they, at least in our generation, we try to say we don't do it. In our parents' generation, it was acceptable. My favorite child. They would say, actually, I remember my mother saying it to me once. I mean, this is how they spoke. But at least in our generation, we know we're not supposed to say it. But I do believe in working with people that there's always one that is favored, and that favored one sometimes carries a very heavy load, because with that favoritism is expectations. That favored one has to take care of the parents. That favored one has to support the parents. So it's not always so simple to be favored. But I think what you're talking about is that what we end up seeing as therapists is siblings really fighting with each other about stupidity. Like they'll fight. A parent dies and they don't leave a very clear will, or they don't leave a will sometimes, which is terrible. I always tell people, write a will. It's a schut. It's
part of segula, yeah.
It's a segula to live a long life. Yeah. What are you doing to your kids? It's going to be just problems.
What if you have nothing to leave? Do you still write a will?
Yes. You always have something to leave. They'll fight about the sewing box. I remember someone told me they were fighting about their mother's sewing box.
So this is even going back to Cain and Abel, really.
Right.
Right? Where one was the favored child, so to speak, of God. But you think it's only that the favored child phenomenon is the only source of these conflicts, which we all know sometimes can go on for
I don't
decades.
think anything is always. Every situation is different. Mm-hmm. But I think that sibling rivalry is huge. And I think that in general, it's not only sibling rivalry. People in general are jealous of one another. Jealousy is a core issue. And there's a saying in Hebrew, which you know, Ezeho Ashir Hasamech Bechelko. He who is rich, who is happy with what they have. And often when you see these people, why are they really fighting? Are they fighting about these things? They're fighting about who's going to get it, who's going to win, who's going to be in control. I don't know if they're actually fighting when I actually look at them deeply and I say, what are you really fighting about? And many of them yearn. They yearn to really, it's not so simple. Like you think that many of them do yearn to have peace. And they do want to have peace. They just, it's like, I'm not going to be the first one to say I'm sorry. I'm not going to be the first one to forgive. He started with me. I mean.
Dr. Respler, you started and you actually dissected in two issues, and I think now that I'm getting a little bit older, let's first start from the parent's perspective. What do I do, in fact, if I do have a favorite child? For some reason or another, remember, love is not as easy as controllable as other behaviors.
Correct.
And therefore, I may be talking to one child a little bit different than others, or want to give, or like you said, responsibility, I think was an excellent point. Being favorite, you also have now all the jobs that
That's
you
right.
have to do. So the question is, am I burdening? I'm at an age where you have to sometimes fill out forms and you write and say, who do we notify?
Right, who do we
if
notify?
something
Who's the
happens?
healthcare proxy?
Right. So I write a particular child down. What do you, if the parent came to you, what would be the advice to the parent? And then we'll talk about the children themselves of what we can do.
You see, one thing I see both of you saying, every parent is different. Every situation is different. So when you say what would be the advice to the parent, depending on what they're presenting with. I could have one parent who is, as I say, favoring, and one parent who's not favoring, but maybe giving more money to one child and the other child resents it. Each situation is different. So that's part of, I think, what I want to say. Like, every situation is different. Every person is different, whether they're Jewish, non-Jewish, every human being is different. So for me to say what would be the advice to the parent depends on the parent. What is the parent coming with? Are they coming with a story that they yelled the whole day at the kids and they were angry, and sometimes that actually unifies the children? I've seen situations like that where the parents are very hostile and angry and the children become very close. They become very close-knit because they know they have a common enemy and they have to survive. And they are very close. I've seen situations like this. The children are busy fighting the parents their whole life, so they maintain a closeness that's unrivaled. And then you see every situation is different. So I feel awkward answering a question very like, what is? Depends who.
Well, we honored you to lecture in our congregation. What general advice would you give to parents, and then what general advice would you give?
Well, but before she answers the question, you're very focused on the parents being at the root cause of this.
That's right.
I'm not there yet.
That's right. I agree with him.
Let me give you an example of where the parents are not at a root cause, and you see this all the time as well. You have two siblings, and they both marry, and one of them, the ones they marry, cause a rift between the two siblings. Okay. Mm-hmm. Prior to that, there was no problem, between the siblings. So that's why I'm saying parents are not always at the root cause. So that's where we'll.
I think it's an excellent example because that's why I have a hard time answering. I always every situation is different, and this is not such an atypical situation where you have two siblings that get married, and the in-laws cause the problem. And sometimes the parents will favor one in-law child, or the in-law child will try to get the love that they didn't get from their own parents from those parents. There's a lot of transference, what we call it. They have their issues with their own parents, so they see suddenly a healthy parent, let me attach myself to that parent. So every situation is different. I'm just trying to clarify what is it that you're asking? I'm just not sure what you're asking. What is?
I paused because there was all this discussion about parents being at the root cause. All right. Let's get away from root cause because now we see that it's not always at the root cause. What to do in that situation? Sometimes it can be distressing. And again, you can see siblings who don't talk for decades.
Years. Yeah, decades.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. it can be equally distressing, but they can't find their way back. It can be distressing to one or the other. It can be distressing to neither. Maybe it's distressing to the parents. Maybe it's distressing to the grandchildren, who have cousins who don't see each other.
Yeah.
Right. So that's really the question that I'm posing is, and someone would come to you and say that really the source of my distress is that, I had a wonderful relationship with my sibling and it's gone awry for the last 10 years.
So the biggest problem I have is that sometimes the people who actually come for therapy are not the people who actually need it. I'm sure you see that too. The person who's really coming for help, that's already a level. It's a level of help. I'm coming for help because I want to make the situation better. And the person who really needs help will say, I'm never going to a therapist. I'm not crazy. My spouse is crazy. My brother is crazy. My parents are crazy. Everyone else is crazy. I'm perfect. And that's a lower level of health. I remember once going shopping to my butcher, and he was joking with me, but he was right. He goes, Yael, you don't see crazy people. I see crazy people. They come in here, they drive me crazy with the chicken bones, with this, with that. Because at least the people that come to you, they know they have a problem. They're coming, and it's true. So I would say that when you're asking me a question, I keep repeating myself, but every situation is different. Every parental situation is different. Every child is different. Children have, and also there are genetic differences in personality. I mean, we're not addressing it.
I recognize there's not one size that fits all, but there has to be a starting point. And I'm wondering if I can get from you, from your perspective, a starting point. What would I tell parents? What I would tell siblings? What I tell family? Or if I tell you, listen, my sister stopped talking to me, my brother stopped talking to me, and I do want to do something. What are some of the simple suggestions that you would?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is, what can you do? Whoever I'm seeing, when people come in and tell me, well, I always say, you know what, I'm not treating those other people. I'm not telling you they're not crazy. You're here in my office. I'm working with you. What is it that you can do to improve the situation? What is it? Oh, but I said, I understand they may be more at fault, but you're here. That's a big thing. I said, and I'll tell them, you took the first step to come here, and you're paying, and you're coming, and you're trying to get better. So what can you do? That's the first thing I will tell anyone, whether it be the parent or the child. What can you do to make the situation better? So I'm very into everyone looking at themselves, because at the end of the day, we can't even change ourselves. You know how hard it is, right? We can only maybe change ourselves, and to change someone else who doesn't want to be changed. So I think accepting the fact, and I would say this is across the board, that if it's a parent, if it's a child, I'll say to the parent, what can you do to make this, if the parent's coming to me for help, let's say, my children aren't talking to me. I have that, unfortunately, too often. They don't want to have anything to do with me. They're busy with their friends. They don't have time for me. They don't invite me enough for the week showers, for Yontif. They just don't want to. I will say, well, when you go, what do you do? What do you do? How do you present yourself? How do you come into the family? And they'll say, well, I'm a little critical. I'm trying to help them be better. I'm trying to improve the situation. So then I'll start with working on that. Now, again, as a therapist, and you know this, you need a release to speak to anyone. You can't, even if you speak for free, by the way, you can't even speak for free on the phone. Because New York law is, if you speak for free on the phone to someone, the minute you pick up that phone and speak to that person, even if they're not paying you, you are their therapist, they could sue you. So I am very careful with releases, and I don't speak to anyone about anything unless they give me a release. So I will say to the parent, okay, I will try to call your child. You have to sign a release. Now, sometimes the child will say, okay, I'm really thrilled about this call. My parents are coming to help. I want to come in. I want to work on it. But more often than not, that is not what happens. Unfortunately, they'll say, I can't deal with this parent. I had enough. They'll give me an hour of complaints, and they don't want to make peace. And that's a huge problem. And that could be the fault of the children, that they don't want, they want to have an independent life. They want to do their own thing. It's like you said, it's not always the parents. It could be the children, or also we're living in a very me generation. It's very me. What's good for me? What do I do? What can I get for me?
Because of my background as a deprogrammer and what we call someone's program, I will also often get a call. Throughout the year, I get a few calls. Yes, a parent calls me, says, my daughter got married, my son got married, and since they got married, they cut themselves off from the family. Right. And therefore, is my child in a one-person cult? Did my son-in-law brainwash my daughter that we're bad? Did my daughter-in-law brainwash my son that we're bad? And most of those cases do not end with a very, very happy ending. And the real question is, now that we're covered on three sides, is there something that we can tell our people, hey, this may be a suggestion?
Okay, so I'm going to answer you. I think what I said to you originally is the best suggestion. What can you do differently? What can you do? I don't know the situation. Everyone's different. Each situation is different. But if the person who's coming to you and for help, asking you a question even as a rabbi, wants to change, you could say to them, is there anything you feel you could do to improve the situation? Oh, they're such difficult kids. Okay, I understand that, but is there anything you feel you can do? And sometimes, and that's where there is some therapeutic move, if the parent does change the way of behaving, or the child does change the way of behaving, sometimes it's the opposite. I have children who will come to me and say, I'm dying to be with my parents. They never have time for me. They're always vacationing. They don't have anything to do with me. They're happy I'm married, finished, goodbye. I don't want the grandchildren make too much noise. I want to be free from you. It works both ways.
Let's take this completely upside down. I'm going to flip it on its 180 degrees. Different scenario, same problem, but different scenario. You have two siblings, and one sibling is simply, overtly, hands down, abusive and sadistic, and we could say personality disordered, meaning that the way their interpersonal, the way they relate interpersonally, it's a fixed pattern. It doesn't change, and truly, it is impossible to get along with them.
Right.
Maybe that's a time that someone has to make peace with themselves. In other words, I guess what I'm throwing out here is, aren't there times when, rather than asking them, in what can you do, that you're holding on too long, and the only net result of holding on too long is that you're getting the pulp beat out of you.
You're actually getting sick.
Yeah. And that you have to find some peace within yourself and accept the situation that it simply is not going to change.
Right. Okay, so I think Dr. Bruce is making an excellent point. There are situations where you just have to help people live with what is and say to them, I know you're a very enthusiastic person. I love that about you. But sometimes we can't help everyone. And sometimes helping someone is just helping them accept what is. That's what you're saying.
But in my mind, when I hear the word siblings, I think of immediately that there must be a parent or an older member of the family that sometimes can call the two people
maybe
together.
Sometimes that parent is not even alive anymore.
Right.
Maybe the conflict between the siblings serves the parents.
That's an excellent point, by the way. Do you understand what he's saying?
Yes.
Yeah. It's an excellent point because
actually,
it gives them a
earlier
lot.
on he said something which also actually sent a chill up my spine, and that is children who have come to a parent and said, my sibling abused me. And what I hear from parents is, I said, your daughter came to you. Why didn't you? My daughter was talking about my son. You mean I should accept what a person who came and told me that my son was an abuser, or sometimes vice versa? And therefore, it is a tremendous difficulty that all of a sudden one child is telling me a lashon hara, so to speak, on the other child, and I don't envy that parent. And I understand very clearly where you just sort of don't want to deal with the problem.
But Dr. Bruce is making another point, that sometimes you could help a person by helping them accept that this cannot be changed, right? Is that what you're saying? Am I right? That they have to learn how to accept something very painful and live with it and somehow find happiness in other ways. because they may want to make and I think that's what you're seeing the two of us being so rah 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 enthusiastic, and you're saying, and you're right, because we could say rah rah enthusiastic, but realistically he's right. I know he's right because I work with people. In some situations, I have to tell people it's very painful, but this, you've done the best you can. This is what it is. It is what it is, and I have to help you learn how to live with this. And that, I think that's what you're saying. Am I correct?
Precisely. No.
And as you're saying it, actually, what's going through my mind is, imagine your brother or your sister has a physical handicap, and because of that, they cannot, visit you as much or speak to you as much. Now transfer that physical handicap to a mental handicap. And therefore, you know what? This is who your brother is. This is who your sister is.
So it's easier to accept a physical handicap than a mental.
Of course.
And it's harder to live with the mental handicap because, this is what God, even a physical disease is easier to accept than a mental. Because you always think, and I always say to people, this is when I'm going to plug you. I really believe there are certain things that are just not treatable without medication. They're just not. Like OCD. And they're not. And people will say, well, there's a therapist who claims they can help you with that. And I know I've had a lot of success with OCD, but only with working with this good psychiatrist who helps me get the right meds, and I do CBT therapy. Then in a short time, I could get them on their feet. So. And
by the way, we're running out of time, but I want the doctor, if you can really address that, because that's one question that really comes up very often. When does the rabbi or the therapist say, you know what, you need to see a psychiatrist because you need medication? Where is that point where they cross the line and say, you know what, you need to see a psychiatrist?
If you really feel that person will not get help without medication, it should be sooner than later. And there are times, and I really feel that in certain situations, they will just not be helped without medication. I always say to someone who's anti-medication, because I'm not anti, my first husband was a doctor, I'm not anti-medication. And I'll say to them, listen, if you know that medication can help you, it's kind of like if you have diabetes, would you tell the doctor, I'm not taking the medication for diabetes? You're going to die without the medication. But if you have a psychological problem, and that could be, by the way, OCD is genetic. Many psychological situations are genetic. And you cannot, the voices are in your head or whatever's going on, you cannot fight it without medication. So to be anti-medication is not to be smart. Because Baruch Hashem did give us great psychiatrists, and they prescribe medication that can actually change your life. I mean, I think you'd agree with that.
I do agree, and I love ending episodes on points of agreement. But we are out of time. Thank you for tuning in tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at the next episode of The Rabbi and the Therapist. If you have any questions or comments, you can find our email address below. And till the next time.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed working with both of you.